Welcome to Vintage Helena, a series of profiles of individuals who have made many good things happen in our community and the state of Montana. This is a profile of Terry Beaver, a highly respected education leader in our community for many years. Terry was born on New Year's Day, 1940, right here in the old St. John's Hospital. After a teaching career that spanned nearly 4 decades, Terry ran successfully in 2002 for the Helena School Board. I know you'll find Terry's life story of interest, with a cameo by his daughter Julie, and especially the tale of quitting kindergarten and not finding value in education until his junior year in high school.
The beginning for me was quite a while back. It was in 1940, and my mother lived here, and I had a sister here, and then a couple of aunts, and my mother and father had just divorced, and I was born on January 1st. Everybody celebrated the night before. I'm sure everybody in the country celebrated my birth on January 1st, 1940, but I was born down in St. John's Hospital in Helena, and then a couple days later we came back home and lived right here in Marysville, between the two churches, between the Catholic and the Methodist church, right across the street here from the schoolhouse. And we remained here in Marysville until I began school. Then my mother and 2 of her sisters moved to town. They both had children too, and so they moved to town, and we would come back up here in the summers though. So I spent a lot of time in the summers up here. My dad's family came here in about 1885, and my mother's family came here in about 1903. They homesteaded just over the hill in Trinity Gulch, and as kids they had to walk 2 miles to school right here in this building, and I'm sure it was uphill both ways in 6 feet of snow. So you know, it was, both families were involved somewhat in mining. My maternal grandfather drove the stage from Helena to Empire, and then from Empire they would split off on alternate days, and they'd come down the Little Prickly Pear one day and back up from Canyon Creek, and then on alternate days they would break off to the south and west and go up toward Bald Butte, and then come back to Marysville from there. So yeah, it was a stage service there. So my great-grandfather on the maternal side worked over in Gould, which is a ways away, but he would walk to Gould every Sunday evening and walk back every Friday evening to get back home. I mean, it was amazing what those people did at that time. So during the summers I would come back up here, and I was working sort of with an uncle, you know, when I was probably 11 and 12, 13 years old. He had a mining claim down on Sawmill Gulch, which was 3 miles down Silver Creek. And we worked that mining claim. He worked the mining claim, and I hunted rabbits and so on, but I pretended like I was working with him, I guess. But it was enjoyable, and we lived in an old family house here at that time, and yeah, I can remember one summer I had spent the entire summer here, and I was just about ready to go back to school, and I broke out with a horrendous rash, and they took me to the doctor's office down in Helena. I think it was Dr. Lindstrom at that time. Took me to the doctor down there, and he says, "What have you been eating?" And I told him just, well, whatever my Uncle Jack had, that's what I was eating. He says, "Well, tell me what you're eating." I said, "Well, buckwheat cakes for breakfast with syrup on them, and then we'd have a couple more buckwheat cakes for lunch, and you'd put in peanut butter in those, and then we'd have buckwheat cakes at night with hamburger maybe, deer hamburger, deer steaks, whatever. And he says, so you're eating a lot of buckwheat. He says, you're allergic to buckwheat. And I was broken out all over with buckwheat, but buckwheat rash, I guess. So I haven't eaten any buckwheat since, I guess. But yeah. We were placer mining down there, so it was, we had a sluice box, and he would pan, and then if we ran across anything decent, then he'd hook up a sluice box, and so I had the job of rocking the box most of the day and adding water, and he was doing the heavier work. But you know, we'd come up with enough money, I guess, for him to get through the rest of the year with it. So nothing extensive, though, I'm sure. I went to kindergarten. The only place they offered it at that time was at St. Helena School, the Catholic school. And apparently, I don't really recall, but I went to school the first day, and my mother got me enrolled. And I had been playing in the sandbox. They had a nice sandbox there, apparently, and she left, but so did I. If they weren't going to let me play in the sandbox anymore, I was going home. So that was my last day in kindergarten. I didn't go back. Probably shows now that I missed that part of my education.
So, Terry, we're here at May Butler, and I seem to recollect that you went to school here once upon a time.
Once upon a time, yeah.
Tell us about it.
It was long ago. I actually attended the first grade at Central School, but then we moved, and we moved up onto South Spencer. And from South Spencer, this was then Emerson School. Okay. And it was a primary school. At the far end of the hall on the right there was the first grade, and the second grade was on the left, and this was the third grade classroom over here.
You made it to third grade?
Yeah. It only took me, well, yeah, I guess I spent 1 year in the second, one in the third, and then this was the library. Okay. And then downstairs there was a fourth grade classroom, and then a combination cafeteria, gymnasium, auditorium, stage type thing. Now it's all in an administrative building, and it's too small for that too, but
even outgrowing
getting by. So I really only got to go here for 1 year. Okay. I went here for my 9th grade year, and then the new high school opened up east of here, and that became the high school. This brings back old memories.
I'll bet it does.
I never did get to teach in this building, but spent 1 year here as a 9th grader. You know, the recollections I have in this building, I think were particularly with a science teacher, Mr. Fisk. And Mr. Fisk was a story in and of himself. You know, he was a football coach and a science teacher, and I can remember him each morning. He would come in and he would shine his shoes in front of the class, put his hat and coat away, and everybody was at attention before he entered the room. And yeah, it was very, very strict, but I had a great appreciation for him. My mother then, I had a sister, and my sister had a congenital heart disorder, and she had been operated on in Denver for open heart surgery in about 1950. So it was probably one of the first open heart surgeries at that time, and so she was still having some problems. Like 3-4 years later. And so my mother moved to Denver so that she could have another operation and be treated there in Children's Hospital in Denver. So I went with my mother down to Denver, and she enrolled me in school down there. And I guess similar to kindergarten, I
They didn't have a sandbox.
no, if they had, I might have stayed. But you know, I did not like school there at all. I guess I was
How old
pretty
were you then?
belligerent.
What grade was
That would have been when I was in the 9th grade.
Really?
And I had to ride the city bus to school and make a transfer downtown to get to school. And, you know, I got a lot of excuses, but it didn't materialize for me. And so I really didn't attend school that year, just off and on, which might have been a blessing in disguise. But anyway, I didn't like Denver at all. And my aunt, Jessie here, who was living in Helena, said, well, he can come back and live with me and go to school here. So I did. So I came back, and so I missed, my 9th grade year, almost completely. I had missed it. So I enrolled here as a 9th grader, and at what is now Helena Middle School. It was Helena Junior High School at that time then. And so I redshirted for a year is what it amounted to, I guess. It sounds better than missing a day or another year in the sandbox, I guess. So, you know, it was a good transition for me. I came back, and I wasn't the best of student by any means. I didn't see much use in education at all. So, got through junior high school and moved over to the high school, and that was the first year that the high school opened, was when I was a sophomore. So I went through their sophomore, junior, and senior years, and I was in the first graduating class in 1958 that had gone all the way through the new high school, which is now 60 plus years old. But yeah, absolutely. But I wasn't a great student then either. I finally decided to buckle down a little bit when I became a junior. I decided that, boy, there must be something to this education thing. And I became a somewhat decent student at that time. I think it helped that I had some instructors that I really, really appreciated. Lloyd Score was one of them, and he took me under his wing, and I was playing basketball for him, and actually had him as an algebra teacher too. But I greatly appreciated him as a coach, and he was a father figure to me. And that's something that I had lacked in my life, and he provided that to me. Had another great teacher who was Amsel Green. She was an English teacher, a Latin teacher. She taught a course called Word Clues. And Word Clues was all about Latin and Greek derivatives of derivations of words. And it was a fantastic course, and I really liked that course. I eventually became a biology teacher, but another ugly story, I guess. When the first day that I was in my biology class at Helena High School, I was a sophomore, and I had a gentleman by the name of Gus Leger, and he was well renowned, and I'm sure a very, very good teacher. But we got off on the wrong foot when I told him that I was managing the football team and I would miss class on Friday. And he said, no, he says, you're either going to take biology or you're going to go with a football team. And I didn't stay in biology.
Sort of like
So
that sandbox.
it was, yeah.
I see a recurrent
There is, yeah. And maybe when I get out of here, I'm going to go home and build a sandbox, and I'll feel better about myself.
So you skip biology.
Yeah, my sophomore year, when I should have been taking biology, I didn't. So I signed up for something else, and I don't even know what it was now. but it didn't mean much to me at that time. The next year I took biology from a different biology teacher. Kay Calvin was her name, and she didn't teach at Helena High very long, but she understood me, or I don't know, I was probably so belligerent that she just didn't have any choice, I suppose. But I can recall one day in class there in which I was being rather obstreperous, I'm sure, and she didn't greatly appreciate it. So she made a comment. She said, "Terry, would you like to teach this class?" And I thought about it. And as belligerent as I was, I said yes. And it didn't go any further than that. There was no way that, I was some little ignoramus that was just mouthing off. But it made me think about it, I guess. And so I buckled down and became a decent student as a junior and senior. Surely was not an academician by any standards, but I was there. And I developed a sincere interest in biology and the sciences, and then went on from there. And my mother was still living in Denver, and so I had established some sort of residency there. Maybe not really, but it worked out that way, that I had in-state residency there, and I have no idea how that occurred. So I went to the University of Colorado, and I was going to play basketball at the University of Colorado. Lloyd Score had given me a little bit of help there, but I found out very rapidly that that was well beyond my capabilities, and in fact, Sox Walseth told me, he says, we have a 12-man freshman team, and if I were to rank you in those 12, you'd be 13. He says, but if you make the varsity the next year, you get a scholarship. Well, there was not a prayer. So I transferred to Colorado State College, which was in Greeley, and it has now become University of Northern Colorado. But there I found a home, and I found a home in the academic area. I just flourished there. I just absolutely loved learning at that time, and always wished that I had had a more sincere background. The background was there for me through the Helena schools. I just hadn't taken advantage of it. But I learned to love learning immediately at Colorado State College, and met a beautiful girl at school. Patty Ahern was her name, and we got married in '64, and moved. She was an English teacher, and we moved to East Helena immediately, and then on to Helena, and we started having kids, and she didn't want to teach at that time, so she was working as what we now call a para, and grading papers for Joe Ventura at that time at the Helena Middle School, and she worked all the time we had kids. In fact, when we had our first one, Julie, Joe Ventura sent her some papers in the hospital while she was still there, papers for her to grade. So she continued that on, and she worked at Helena Middle School as a secretary for 42 years. Julie is the eldest, and she now works in the same capacity I had at Helena High School. She teaches advanced biology and chemistry at Helena High. And then Lori is our second daughter. She now lives in Bridger, and she works for an oil company. She gets to work out of her home in Bridger, so works for an oil company up on the Bakken. And she is married, and she has two daughters who are fantastic volleyball and basketball players. They're both tall girls. About one of them's freshman and one of them's a junior, and they're both 5'11", I think, still growing there. So Our third child is Jeff, and Jeff teaches elementary physical education at Hawthorne and Jim Darcy. And he and his wife Kim have 2 boys, Tyler and Cole, who are both in Jefferson School, active in school, great students, no sandbox involved. I had my first job in East Helena, and I was the science teacher in East Helena, and then I coached 3 sports there. And from there, Bob Radley was the superintendent out there at that time, and Bob said, we've got to get you into biology specifically. So he actually got me a job with the Helena School District teaching biology at Helena High School. So I started teaching there in '65 and taught biology there for 37 years. So, well, this was one of the original wings on the 2nd floor, and this was the science wing. So we had 2 biology classes here, chemistry at the end of the hall, physics, and a math class on this side of the hall. This wing is the one that burned 2 years ago now, and it has been completely refurbished and is beautiful now. Nice. So I spent 25 years teaching in this classroom.
Right in this classroom.
Teaching biology and advanced biology, and you know, I think it's advanced biology is probably renowned for the fact that we were dissecting cats for a great portion of a semester, and there are a lot of kids that dissected cats in this classroom, and there are a lot of memories for many kids there.
I was fortunate enough to go into teaching, and I was in a small town for 3 years, and then I moved back to Helena and got a job here with my dad, and we taught together for what we decide?
7 years, I think. Yeah, they built this new wing in 1995, and I retired in '02, so we were together for 7 years, and when I left, I just walked away, and you know, most teachers will clean out their room and so on, and I left all of my good things for her to use, even though they weren't very good things, and she had to do all of the sorting out and cleaning out of
so he had
all
box,
that material.
Like a paper box of all of his seating charts from 1987 until the year that he retired.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and you can still sometimes ask him, you know, where did this kid sit, and he'll tell you he sat here with, you know, Johnny.
I remember some of those. Yeah, I do. It's difficult to recognize faces now from long ago, but I do recollect where they sat in the classroom, and
You do.
yeah,
Some more than others.
I'm afraid so. But they all tend to grow up. You see them today, and they just don't act like they did at that time. Thank God they changed, and I was one of those who changed, luckily, or I would never have survived. I wrote a program which was designed for potential dropout kids who were sophomores who had made themselves a promise that when they turned 15 years old they were going to drop out of school. And so we took 30 of those kids and we spent the entire year, 180 days, out in the woods. And we worked on projects out there, like we mapped Marysville for every business establishment that was in the community, and we identified each of them. So the kids, we had responsibility for their math and their science and their English and their art and their physical education and everything. And so then we had projects in which we bought a timber sale from the Helena National Forest and cruised all the timber, and then we built log playhouses in two different structures, one of a Finnish structure and one of a Norwegian structure. And we sold them as playhouses, delivered them at Christmas, and it was a neat project there. We had another project in which we were working with some archaeological things. We had an archaeological dig on a buffalo jump down near Townsend, between Townsend and White Sulphur Springs. And in there we would dig, and you'd find bones and hair and blood, and it was very extensive, and a lot of arrowheads and scrapers and so on. And so we would spend 180 days out in the woods. And kids then began to realize that maybe there was some future in them for education, and they would come back to school as juniors and seniors.
Incredible.
And it was probably the predecessor to our Project for Alternative Learning, now our PAL school. But it worked to a degree. I had some really tough kids and some very good kids. Some of them went on to finish college, and I still hear from some of those.
That's great.
And then, but of course we had some on the other extreme too that
Didn't make it.
no, they ended up in Deer Lodge, and I guess they get out of there sometime, and hopefully they become decent citizens.
And then you retired in 2002.
From teaching, yeah.
And that very year, you ran for the school board.
I did.
Is that right?
Yes, I did.
You won.
I did, by golly. And yeah, this is my 15th year on the board. So yeah, they're 3-year terms. So 5 times re-elected there, and again, I just love it. I mean, it's such a change from where I started. You know, I didn't see any value in education at all, and it has blossomed. Absolutely. To make a great teacher, and I've seen a lot of them, it requires that there be an interrelationship among 3 things. I think among the teacher, the student, and the media that they're teaching. For me, it was biology. And you have to have a love as a teacher. You have to have a love for the kids. You have to have a love for learning. You have to have a love for your media that you are teaching. And kids see that. If you're missing one of those, I think you're missing the boat.
Thank you for watching Vintage Helena. We hope you enjoyed this segment. If you'd like to suggest someone to be profiled by Vintage Helena, please contact us at HCTV. You can also contact us at Helena Civic Television if you'd like to make a donation to the Vintage Helena program.